Toolis.
In about 30 minutes, the Chief of Police, David Roddy, will be meeting with Darrin Ledford and other members of the City Council in, I think it's conference room 13 there on 600 Lindsay Street, where City Council has its offices and the main meeting room. And the questions will be about police procedure, police operations, how it is these city employees wearing their guns and their ammo and their electrical shotguns and their armor, how they interact with members of the public whom they are said to be protecting. That is what we all understand police to be doing, to be protecting the people. And Darrin Ledford has a question. And the question he asks me and asked me this morning in a very cordial and informative meeting is this: David, are you saying that when a person is on the road traveling down the highway and he is inebriated and drunk and weaving and pulled over by a Chattanooga city officer, are you saying that if that person is involved only in private use of that car and is not involved in the act of transportation, which is subject to regulation, are you saying that the officer does not have authority over that person at that moment and over the use of that car as a motor vehicle? Question mark. That's the question that Darrin Ledford, in effect, is asking me. And the short form is, are you saying that under the law, as you're presenting it to us, are you saying that the police do not have authority to stop DUI and arrest DUI suspects and defendants? Question. That is the question. And the answer legally is that if that person is not involved in a regulable activity, that no, the police officer does not have authority to charge him under Title 55, where the drunken driving statute is found. And it's a baffling thing for this council member and others with whom I've talked about this problem in the law to consider. How is it that we have police officers who you're saying cannot enforce clearly reasonable, good, sound safety measures such as DUI? DUI saves lives. We have mad mothers for against drunk driving making many gains in the legislature by statute against drunkenness on the roads. And the answer is patiently given back. Well, yes, that's true. But all of that is in Title 55, which is the transportation statute. What is transportation? Well, and here we're having a problem between what we want to be accomplished that's good and the limits in the law itself. And at the very beginning of my notice, which is called Transportation Administrative Notice, which may come up today in the meeting, probably won't directly because there are other things, police abuse variety, that are first. Transportation is the removal of goods or persons from one place to another by a carrier. Okay, that's what transportation is, and that's in Black's Law Dictionary. A carrier is an individual or organization engaged in transporting passengers or goods for hire. So Darrin Ledford is asking me with some incredulity in his eyes, are you saying, David, that under the law, as you're presenting it or representing it to us in this notice, are you saying that the law cannot empower the officer to charge that person unless that person is involved in a commercial act at that moment, right? And the answer is no, he doesn't have authority. But it occurred to me after my very useful interview with Darrin Ledford that there is cause under the nuisance statute to seize that person as a nuisance and a threat. So there are ways apart from Title 55 that the Chattanooga Police Department could keep a drunk person off the road before he hits someone. Right? There's always its involvement when there is an accident under inebriation. The the misuse of the fruit of the vine, right? That's what inebriation is. The Bible warns against it, though it institutes the proper use of alcohol and wine in the Lord's Supper. So we know the Bible is not a teetotaling document, but it does warn against the temptation, the allurement of the bottle, or in those days, the wineskin, right? The new wine in the new wineskin. It warns against that. We have danger there among members of the public, people like you, my listener, drinking and not being careful with the lives of others. And that's what the drunken driver is doing. He's not acting in care of others. He's just thinking, I got to get home. I'm tired and I'm a bit bleary and I'm not sober and I'm not in my good senses. I'm not looking out for myself and certainly not looking out for others. Does the officer not have the ability to stop that person? And the answer is, in the statute, if that's a private user, the answer is no, because none of the traffic statutes apply to private users. And like it or not, that is the way the law is structured. And yet, in the meeting that I had with Darrin Ledford, there are other questions beyond that one. But that I'd say is the main one. Do we have anarchy? Do we have mayhem on the street if the police do not enforce the traffic statute, which is aimed at against people involved in transportation, right? It only covers them, doesn't cover anybody else. Do we have increased dangers to the public if the police are not there enforcing a statute beyond their legal authority? And I'm not going to answer that question right now. I guess you can probably assume or presume that my answer would be no, that there would not be increased danger, there would not be mayhem. But there's a larger question in which this one finds itself a part. And the larger question is, if we don't have policing per se, do we have chaos in society? Do we have plumes of smoke rising over Brainerd, over Ottawa, over buildings downtown because arson is run amok? There are gangs roving the streets. Banks are being held up. Women are shot over their shopping carts. Their children left weeping among the shattered eggs because a holdup man has gotten his way and no one is there to stop him. Is that what happens in Chattanooga in the poor neighborhoods where there are plenty of armed men, I would suppose, and many of them very young, who are suddenly now, they are suddenly the keepers of the peace? Would we have anarchy and disorder? Would we have an internal revolution? Would there be so much uproar in the streets that under the statute for public order, the sheriff would have to call in the reserves, call in the citizenry to put down a riot? Is that what would happen? Would there be a riot in your neighborhood if the police department budget was cut? I think it's a $70 million budget. Were cut in half, and only $35 million made available for law keeping, peacekeeping, and law enforcement. Is that the threat? So if we cut off $1 million from the budget, would we have an increase in deaths? Would there be more motor vehicle accidents? Well, this is David Toulis, and I do thank you for joining me here at 92.7 and 95.3 FM HD4. We are live on Facebook and Nooga Radio, and also stream into your television set, your regular old TV, if it's a new one, on YouTube. And that is at Nooga Radio. I argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local. And the objections, I would say, the good questions that Darrin Ledford had for me are really, I think, very compelling and very interesting. And I heard the same ones from another council member, Chip Henderson, who raised the same questions. Are you saying that we can't enforce the traffic statute against drunks? That effectively is the same question that Darrin Ledford asks. And so we have this question: if the law is correctly enforced, then do we have an increase in public discomfort, increase in wounds and injuries and harms? Do we have people subsidized effectively? Are people being encouraged to be careless and lawless on the road or in society in general. If we have a cut, and again, these are the two questions kind of asked together, the transportation question here in Chattanooga, and also the question about the budget for the police department, $75 million or so in the new budget, and 500, an occupation force of 500 strong, devoted law enforcers there to enforce Tennessee Code Annotated 39, the criminal statute, and other statutes against the people, and also against the people of the city. And Darrin asked, as I said, he's a very smart man. He's a high quality city council member, highly articulate, and I would say he's the kind of man you'd say should run for mayor. I mean, a man like that should be a candidate for mayor or a higher office. I would say something in the realm of executive. He is a businessman running a printing business, and he seems to be he's a conservative. I think he's a Republican activist and a very clean-spoken, clear-spoken person. And he says, well, explain this to me, because when you come before city council, David Toulis, you've done it twice now, explaining the limits of the statute. There's a lot of kind of dense legal discussion that you offer in the 5 minutes that we allot you. And we're all kind of confused and baffled. And I said, well, I know that's why I wanted to meet with you for 15 minutes, if you're gracious enough to give it, so I can explain it to you. And the reason for this reform touches on a larger question that's really kind of outside the law, and that is the motivation. For whom are we looking out for in pressing this seemingly bizarre claim, a claim that really has not been heard? Though it is one that is voiced all across the country. There are people who are arguing these issues all across the country, and they're called patriots. They're called free travelers, GMO free motorists. That kind of they're people who have various ideas about the limits on their own state's laws, and I have done the research in Tennessee. Here, David Toulis, 92.7 FM. Love your neighbor and buy local is my slogan. Why do you care? Are you saying that blacks somehow, that African Americans are somehow wrongly abused by this under this law? And I said, well, no, David Roddy does not intend that. He does not intend to go after black people particularly. He does not intend to go after the poor particularly. And there's no intent on the part of David Roddy and his law enforcement officials and officers to abuse immigrants. That's not the intent, but that is the effect. And we have to look here at the effects upon people in Chattanooga who, I would say, let's just classify them as the poor, who are ground down and ground up by the arrest routines, the jailing routines, the criminal charge routines. And these are people who are least able to defend themselves. They often rely on the public defender's office. And when it's a traffic case, or driving on revoked, rescinded, felt no insurance, those kinds of things. Those are cases which no public defender worth his salt is going to want to fight. Okay, this is a state office, and these are lawyers will not fight the erroneous presumption that the defendant was involved in a commercial activity. Diana Watt, for example, she is being charged after her July 7 arrest in Brainerd. The base of Missionary Ridge. She's being charged under the transportation statute, though clearly she's not involved in transportation. She wisely would rebut that presumption at the first hearing, in which she says, "Where's the evidence that I was involved in transportation?" And so I'm not sure exactly how she would make that, but that is the main defense, is that she's not involved in the regulable activity that affects the public interest, which is to say moving goods or people for hire as a carrier, common or private. You have to be a carrier to be involved in the transportation law. Why do I care? Why should you, my listener, care? And why should the mayor care? He doesn't, though he is an attorney and knows exactly what I'm talking about. The mayor, Andy Berg, knows exactly that the system he defends with his silence, and which he defends with the work of David Roddy, is effectively most damaging upon the poor. A guy in a bow tie like me, I just pay the fine and get on with it. But if you're poor, you're baffled, you're overwhelmed, you're one step away from being evicted. Your car is not in order. You haven't had an oil change in 30,000 miles, and your wife's transportation, so-called, is not reliable. Neither is yours. But you're just barely getting by, and these claims against these pretended claims for violating law affect the poor the greatest. That was the first point I was making to Darrin Ledford, that though David Roddy loves Chattanooga and has been here all of his life, it's not his intent to distinctly harass blacks and African Americans, but that is the result, because they are the ones who most often have the expired tag, right? Who have the tag light that's out, the little dome light that shows the tax receipt, the metal tax receipt on the back of the car, as being a commercial instrument. And so they have brake lights that are out, right? They have they don't use the indicator making a left turn, and so they are pulled over for probable cause, and the car is searched. And then you have this poor man whose teenage son used the car last night. Now has a drug case against him, and he's in jail and he can't make the bail. So this is affecting the poor the most. And my goal here at 92.7 and on the David Tula Show is to raise the consciousness, not of you, my listener. Your consciousness, I think, is raised a bit every day if you give me 5 minutes, to see this as an evil, right? An evil prohibited by God. In particularly the many passages in the scriptures about strangers, and how we are not to oppress strangers, and how the widow and the orphan, particularly repeatedly in the Old Testament and even in the New, are given a very, very high status of protection. You cannot, as a governor, as a mayor, as a council, oppress people who are widows and orphans, right? People who don't have steady sustenance. There's no husband, right? There's no dad. And I would put, maybe I'm being a little loose here in the biblical interpretation, but I would put divorcees in that category of widow. There are many, the biggest poverty sector in Chattanooga are among divorced women with children. They are almost always in poverty, and the husband is behind on his payments, his legal obligation to pay. And often, of course, he can't pay. He's struggling too. So everybody's out of sorts with the law. People are injured in the law. The law is not protecting them, whether you're the deadbeat dad, so-called, or the dependent mother. All sides are being hurt. Now, the question we have about this reform is this, that if we have a new question added to the arrest protocol, we can make that distinction. But the distinction again between commercial and private use, think of this way: you have a piece of paper down both sides. You have a column. Okay, on the right hand column, you have private use. What is private use of a road? Well, private use is the exercise of your rights, or your right to travel, your right to take part in elections, the right of the press, the right of religion, that would be going to religious assemblies, the right of free association, even the right of abortion, allegedly a constitutional right in Tennessee. You have a right to that. And the state cannot tax you, fine you, regulate you, or require you to have a permit to go and get one. Okay, so if you want to exercise a right to kill your baby in Tennessee with the blessings of Neil Pinkston, the DA, you have a right to get in a car and go without anybody's permission, right? To exercise the right to kill your baby daughter, you have a right to get there freely without an untrammeled and unregulated and unsurveyed and untaxed method, right? That's what's called liberty, right? Liberty is when no one can touch you and put a hand on you and say, stop, you cannot do that without getting my permission and paying me. On the other side now, that's what private use is. On the other side, you've got regulated uses. That would be people who run ambulance services, like the one who took my mom to the hospital the other day at Memorial Hickson. That's a transportation business, Hamilton County EMS, with a $1,500 bill that I'm looking at from the first use of that service, right? Transporting an old woman, 94, in a hospital is something done for pay, and that company, which has a Medicare part and a private part of its business, is involved in transportation, carrying goods or people, in this case, a very frail soul, to the hospital. Cab companies, people who run dump trucks, people who run wrecker services, folks who haul concrete in those twirling mixers, men, women, and companies that run 18-wheelers with their giant trailers, sometimes double trailers. Those are subject to regulation in the public interest. They are called, and the reason for that is because it affects the public health, safety, and welfare, even the morals, if you will. So that's why you have this regulation. So now the question is, can we have the officer in a traffic stop ask the question that separates these two and saves the protection to have any dealings with the private party, including, here's Darrin Ledford's word, including the drunk man. How does the drunk man get off the road? Darrin Ledford, city council member, is wondering, what are you going to do about him, Dave? You're going to let him go? Is that it? Make the cops take him home? Now cops are taxi services? Is that what you're saying, David?
3, 2, 1. Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
A strange case of punch and run on Boynton Drive. A man was reportedly standing on a sidewalk when an unknown assailant walked up, threw a punch, and took off in a gold-color vehicle. The victim telling cops he didn't want to press charges and didn't need medical attention, just confused as to why someone would hit him and speed off. The THP ID'd the victim.